Standing at the gangway of the USS Freedom, a weathered man in his 60s faced humiliation he never expected. Lieutenant James Parker blocked his path, eyes cold with judgment. "Sir, this ceremony is for actual Navy personnel and honored guests. I can't let random people wander onto a commissioned warship." The words hit like shrapnel. Around them, officers and sailors whispered, their stares heavy with assumption. The veteran's jaw tightened, decades of discipline holding back a storm. What Lieutenant Parker didn't know would cost him his career, because the man he was turning away wasn't just anyone. He was a ghost from Navy legend. The morning sun cast golden light across Naval Base San Diego, where the U.S. Freedom sat gleaming in the harbor. Her steel hull reflected decades of innovation, a Zumwalt-class destroyer representing America's naval future. Captain Bill Harrison had driven 3 hours from his modest home in Riverside, his wife Maria insisting he attend despite his reluctance. "They invited you personally, Bill. You helped build that ship. Go." Her Italian stubbornness won, as always. Now he stood before Lieutenant James Parker, a man barely 30 with a uniform so crisp it could cut glass. Parker's eyes scanned Harrison from head to toe, taking in the worn sport coat, the simple slacks, the calloused hands that told stories of labor and age. No medals, no uniform, no obvious markers of status. Just an old man who looked like he'd wandered off a fishing boat. "I need to see your invitation," Parker said, his voice carrying the particular arrogance of someone who'd never been truly tested. Harrison reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly, deliberately. His hands, scarred from rope burns and shrapnel, fumbled with the envelope. Parker's impatience radiated like heat. "Sir, I don't have all day. This is a high-security event. The Secretary of the Navy is attending." "I understand," Harrison replied quietly, his voice gravelly from years of shouting orders over rotor wash and gunfire. "I have the invitation right here." But before he could produce it, Parker held up a hand. "Actually, let me ask you something. What's your connection to the Navy? Are you former enlisted?" The way he said enlisted carried a subtle dismissal, as if that service somehow counted less. Harrison's blue eyes, still sharp despite the years, met Parker's. "I served." "For how long?" 28 years, Parker's eyebrow raised, skepticism clear. 28 years and no one told you to wear your uniform to a commissioning ceremony? That's basic protocol, sir. A small crowd had gathered now. Junior officers, civilian contractors, families of crew members. They watched with that uncomfortable fascination people have for public confrontations. Harrison felt their judgment, their assumptions forming like storm clouds. He'd faced enemy fire without flinching, had made split-second decisions that saved lives. But this particular kind of humiliation cut differently. This was his own tribe turning on him. "I prefer civilian clothes," Harrison said simply. "I'm sure you do." Parker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Look, sir, I sympathize. A lot of people want to tour the ship, but this event is invitation only. If you'd like to request a public tour next month, I can give you the website." Harrison's fingers tightened around the envelope in his pocket. Every instinct screamed to defend himself, to explain, to pull rank from a career Parker couldn't imagine. But something deeper held him back. Pride, maybe. Or a test he was giving this young officer. A chance to correct course before driving off a cliff. Harrison had always believed in giving people rope. Sometimes they climbed up, sometimes they hanged themselves. "I have an invitation," he repeated, his voice quieter now, more dangerous. Lieutenant Parker crossed his arms, his body language screaming authority he hadn't truly earned. "Sir, I'm trying to be respectful here, but you're holding up the line. If you actually had an invitation, you would have shown it by now instead of wasting everyone's time." Behind Harrison, a line of legitimate guests had formed. Congressmen's aides, defense contractor executives in expensive suits, retired admirals with chests full of ribbons. They shifted impatiently, their irritation palpable. Harrison felt it pressing against his back like a physical force. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," Parker continued, his voice rising just enough for the crowd to hear clearly. "If you continue to refuse, I'll call the master at arms. I don't want to embarrass you further, but I will if necessary." The threat of military police hung in the air. Harrison's pulse quickened, muscle memory from decades of combat flooding his system. His breathing stayed controlled, but his vision sharpened in that way it used to before missions. Fight or flight response from a body trained for violence. He was 72 years old and could still drop this kid in 3 seconds flat. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. A young junior officer, Sarah Chen, stood nearby. Her eyes darted between Parker and Harrison, discomfort written across her face. She'd heard stories in the fleet, legends about officers from the old guard, the ones who'd done things that never made the news. Something about this old man's stillness, his coiled restraint, triggered recognition. But she was junior, and Parker was her superior. She stayed silent. "I was personally invited by Admiral Morrison," Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I designed the integrated combat system on this ship, the defensive protocols, the automated targeting sequences. I spent 2 years consulting on this vessel." Parker actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Sir, that's an interesting story, but the defense systems on the Freedom were designed by NAVSEA contractors and engineers with top-secret clearances, not by—" He gestured vaguely at Harrison's civilian clothes. Retired personnel walking in off the street." Something cracked in Harrison's chest. Not anger, worse, disappointment. This was the new Navy. These were the officers who had never learned that rank without respect was just noise, that a uniform without understanding was just costume. He thought about his grandson Marcus, who wanted to join the academy. Would this be his future? Arrogance masquerading as professionalism? "You're making a mistake," Harrison said simply. "The only mistake here is your refusal to leave. I'm calling security." Parker reached for his radio, and that's when the crowd suddenly parted like the Red Sea. Admiral Thomas Morrison moved through the crowd with the kind of presence that made sailors unconsciously straighten their spines. 3 stars gleamed on his shoulder boards. Ribbons covered his chest in a rainbow of service and sacrifice. At 65, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd commanded carrier strike groups and sat in the Pentagon's inner circles. But right now, his face showed something rare for a flag officer: shock. "Bill? Bill Harrison?" The name echoed across the pier like a depth charge. Lieutenant Parker's hand froze on his radio. Harrison turned, and for the first time that morning, a genuine smile crossed his weathered face. "Hello, Tom." Morrison crossed the remaining distance in 4 long strides and grabbed Harrison's hand in both of his. "Good God, man, I didn't think you'd actually come. Maria convinced you?" "You know how she is. Immovable object meets unstoppable force." Morrison's laugh was warm, real. Then his eyes shifted to Parker, and the warmth evaporated like water on a reactor deck. "Lieutenant, what's going on here?" Parker's mouth opened and closed. His face had gone from confident tan to sheet white in seconds. "Sir, this gentleman didn't have proper identification visible, and I was following security protocols." "This gentleman," Morrison interrupted, his voice dropping to that particular tone that made junior officers wish for enemy fire instead, "is Captain William Harrison, retired, Navy SEAL, Medal of Honor recipient, 3 silver stars, 5 bronze stars with valor, 2 Purple Hearts. Should I continue, Lieutenant? Or are you beginning to understand the magnitude of your mistake?" The crowd had gone absolutely silent. Even the seagulls seemed to shut up. Morrison turned back to Harrison, his voice softening. "Bill designed the fire control systems we're standing on. He spent 18 months at NAVSEA working with the contractors. He did the field work in Afghanistan and Iraq that informed our counterboarding protocols. The Freedom exists because men like him bled for the knowledge we built into her hull." Harrison held up a hand. "Tom, it's fine. The lieutenant was doing his job." "No." Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. "He was making assumptions. There's a difference between security and prejudice." He turned back to Parker, who looked like he wanted the deck to swallow him whole. "Captain Harrison was personally invited by me to attend this ceremony and tour the systems he designed. Did you check the VIP list?" "No, sir. He didn't look like what, Lieutenant? Didn't look important enough. Didn't look the way you think a war hero should look?" Morrison stepped closer. "Let me tell you something about Captain Harrison. In 2003, his SEAL team extracted 12 hostages from a compound in Fallujah. They were outnumbered 4-1. He took shrapnel in 3 places and still carried 2 wounded teammates to the extraction point. He could have retired with full disability. Instead, he spent another decade training the next generation and consulting on naval systems, and you tried to have him arrested." Harrison cleared his throat. "Admiral, really? Let me finish, Bill." Morrison's eyes never left Parker. You represent the United States Navy, Lieutenant. Every action, every word, every judgment you make reflects on 300 years of tradition. Today you failed that tradition spectacularly. Lieutenant Parker stood at attention, his career flashing before his eyes. Sir, I apologize. I was wrong. Captain Harrison, There's no excuse. Harrison studied the young officer. He saw fear there, yes, but also something else. The beginning of understanding, maybe. Apology noted, Harrison said quietly. But you need to learn something, son. The most dangerous people rarely look dangerous. The most accomplished rarely need to prove it. And respect isn't about uniforms or appearances. It's about recognizing service in all its forms. Morrison nodded. Lieutenant Parker, report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. We'll discuss your future in the Navy. Now clear the gangway. Parker stepped aside, his movements mechanical. Harrison finally produced his invitation, now unnecessary, and walked aboard the USS Freedom. His footsteps on the deck sounded like coming home. At the top of the gangway, Harrison paused and turned to address the crew assembled on deck. I didn't want to make a scene today. I came because my grandson Marcus asked me questions about the Navy, about service, about what it means to wear the uniform. I wanted to see this ship sail because I believe in what she represents. Not just technology, but promise. The promise that we're better than our worst moments, that we learn, that we grow. His eyes found Parker in the crowd. Every one of you will make mistakes. I did. What matters is what you do after, whether you let pride defend your error or let humility correct it. Admiral Morrison saluted. The crew followed, and Bill Harrison, 72 years old and tired from the drive, saluted back. Later, as the Freedom's engines rumbled to life, Harrison stood beside the combat systems he'd designed. His weathered hands touched the console, feeling the vibration of power and purpose. This was why he'd served, not for recognition, for moments exactly like this. Stories like Captain Harrison's remind us that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. And real heroes rarely look like the movies suggest. They're the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones who have already proven everything and have nothing left to prove. They're our neighbors, our family members, the people we pass without noticing. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated only to discover their true story? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the unexpected heroes among us. Their stories deserve to be told.